Today, one of my favorite topics, something that you've been able to do for a very long time in Servoy, but in the browser things work differently. So today is dedicated to Excel and doing integrations in a web browser, getting data in and out. So Sean, over to you. Is it number 36 already? Number 37?
That's wrong.
36.
Number 37. Yeah, last one was number 36.
Right, number 37, Excel integration.
Correct. My screen's visible, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so like we always do, we're going to start with just a few demos to show you what you can do, and then we'll jump into a bit of the source code so you can see how it was done, and then we do a brief recap with slides so you get to wrap it up and understand everything. I think today's topic will be fairly short. We're just going to do a bit of examples doing exporting and importing with Excel. The reason I picked this topic is, it just comes up all the time with customers we're working with or prospects that are evaluating Servoy. They want to know if it supports Excel integration. So I think this is a good one to just get out there in a tech webinar, get it recorded, and have it on hand so that everyone can understand what it's about. So we're going to jump into the first demo, which is going to be basic exporting. After that, we'll do like sort of formatted exporting, and then we'll do a bit of importing. So you can see I have an example solution up here in my browser. It has just a list of order records. Let's say I want to export what's in the found set of the form. So right now I have everything, but I could also do a search and, I don't know, put in comida, and we get fewer records now. And now I want to do a basic export. So I built a little field chooser here. It is showing me the columns in this table, but because Servoy allows you to look across the data model, even at runtime, I decided to also show calculations and some related data providers going one level deep. So I'm going to just pick a few here. Order date is a primary column. Order total is a calculated value. And then we get down to some of the relations. So we'll export the customer name and maybe the employee first name and last name. After I click OK, you can see that there's a download here. And because I'm too cheap to pay for Microsoft Office, I have some trial version. But you can see here that we get our columns here with including the related data providers. Also, the order total over here you can see is a calculated value. So that's your basic Excel export. This is an XLS file. We also support XLSX. The newer XML version as well. So both file formats are supported for reading and writing. Okay, let's go to the next example, or let's look at the code rather. So I have, on that form, I have a method called, excuse me, let me close all these. It was called basic export. That was called when I clicked that toolbar button. And I did make a field chooser, which is going to show and return a list of fields. I don't think that that's really worth looking at because it doesn't really have anything to do with Excel. That's just looking at my data model. Once we get the fields, I have a generic method here, and this is actually in a base form. You'll notice this is in excelbase.js. So really, I could create another form and the export functionality would work the same. It's fairly generic. So it allows us to pass in what data providers we want to export if we want to override the column names with something nicer. And then pretty much it's one line of code right here. And it's the Excel export plugin. This is the most basic way to export in Excel. And this generates XLS format. And you can just bind it to the found set and you can specify which data providers you want to export. You'll notice there's a third option for template. That's optional. That's if you have an existing Excel file that you want to use or write to. So if you already have something formatted the way you like it, you can have a template, and then fill it and export it. One note, because we are in the browser, writing files for download is a bit different, as Jan mentioned. So I did create a sort of sub method here, a private method that I reuse a lot, but it's also just one line of code. When you do the plugins write file option in the web clients, in the NG client, if you pass in a simple file name like export.xls, it actually dynamically converts that into a download for you. So I didn't have to do anything special to get the download. I just do plugins.file write file, and because it's not an absolute path, then it's going to, and we're in the web client, I'm using the string argument, it's going to convert that into a dynamic download. So you'll notice that that just went right to my browser's download over here, and you can see the URL is generated dynamically with some UUID. So that's handy to know anytime you want to download a file in the NG client, including Excel files. Okay, so that example was very simple. It was one line of code to generate the export and another line of code to write the file and make it available for download. However, you notice that there was no formatting in the Excel, although I could have specified a template. We do support another API for reading and writing Excel files at a very granular level. So, sheets and rows and cells and formatting and all that sort of thing. So I think it's worth looking at an example that does a formatted export. And I did something very simple, which is just to highlight the header columns and make them bold and change the background color. So let's take a look at that example. This time I'll get the same few fields, maybe the order total. Let's do display address. That's another calculated value. We'll do company name. Okay. So now you can see that I've done a bit of formatting here. We make the column headers are orange and orange background color and bold font. That's just one example. Of course, you can get pretty granular. You can get into cell formatting in terms of values. You can, anything that you can do in Excel, really, you can do programmatically through formatting. Let's take a look at the source code for that. We have another method in the base class that I made here called Excel export formatted. Again, it takes a list of those data providers, so we're telling it what columns to export. And you can see that this time we didn't call the Excel export plugin. We're calling a scope. So this is an extra library that you can add to your project through the Web Package Manager. The way that you would do that is you would go to your project, you would go over to the Web Packages node in the Solution Explorer, right-clicking, download Web Packages, and in just a moment we should get a list of the web packages. Now, typically this is used to download components and things for the browser, but you can also just get modules or Servoy solutions. And if you get the SVY utils package with the Excel extension, this one right here, it'll import it and include it as a module in your application, and you'll be ready to go. There's one caveat to that. You also have to get a library to put in your server lib folder. So this is based on the Apache POI project, which is a Java extension, and we just have to add that manually, and I'll show you where to do that in a minute. But let's take a look at the code for the export. So now that we included that project, we get this scope, and we can programmatically create an Excel workbook. Excuse me. I'm basing that off of a data set, so I'm calling convert to data set with my found set for this particular form. Again, this is an inherited form, and I specify which data providers we want to export. And then the format here is going to be XLSX, so the XML version of the Excel file format. Then we can create sheets. So we can create as many sheets as we want, but this is sort of a quick way to do it because it's creating it from the data set. We can also build it up like row by row, cell by cell as well. So if you look at the next few lines here, we have create some header style. I set the font to be bold. That's what this one here is. And the fill background being light orange, etc. Really, you get code complete on all this stuff once you start to work with it. So, you know, I could set borders, etc. You know, fill patterns and things like that. I can hide and show columns. This is just on the styling. It doesn't even get into the data. Anyway, it's a pretty extensive API, so I don't want to get into all the options. You can go to our wiki for that on the project homepage, which I'll show you toward the end of the presentation. Anyway, it's just a little bit more work than the plugin version, which is one line of code, but here you get more control. At the very end, we call workbook get bytes, which returns a byte array, and then I reuse that same method to write the file for download. You could also call workbook, I'm not getting code complete here, it's write file, and then you can pass in a file path. So if you're working on a network file system and you don't want this for download, you just want to write it somewhere, you can write it out to a file. So that's the formatted export. Let's talk next about importing Excel files, because that's a bit trickier because you don't know what you're going to get when you import it. So I made another routine here. With the import, you see I get a file selection dialog. I'm going to go and grab, let's grab this one that I created earlier. And after I upload it, you see that it's actually going to import it and show it in a grid here. So this is just some arbitrary data set that was generated from that Excel file. The code for that is in another method here in the base form. And you can see that I'm calling the file plugin to show file open dialog. Now, again, this works a bit differently in a browser because a browser never has access to just freely browse across your file system. It always has to be in the form of you're about to upload a file in a file form post. So what this method does is it allows you to specify a callback, because really you're gonna have to receive the file as an upload. So I pass in the onUpload method, which is right down here, and this gets an array of files that were uploaded because it could be multiple. In this case, we're just assuming one, and I made another form called Excel import grid, which is really just a form with an empty grid on it, and it has this open method. So the first thing it's going to do is get the workbook for the file that was passed in. And the next thing it's going to do is get the first sheet. And then after that, it's going to get the data for the sheet. Pretty much that gives us a JS data set, and we're going to then create a data source from that. So that's done somewhere down here, right here on line 28. So you can also, at the low level, read over rows and columns, but just calling sheet get data, or sorry, sheet get sheet data will return a JS data set, which, as you know, you can convert to an in-memory data source and use that anywhere, like bound to a form. So that's a shortcut. I could get in there and do things like sheet, get a row at some index, and get a cell and get a value, or read something about a cell formula, or comments or formatting or something like that. But we don't need to do that because we have this sort of shortcut method to just get the sheet data directly. So then we did create an in-memory data source. You can do that from any JS data set. In this case, it's coming from the Excel import. And then what I did is I show this form in a dialog, and it has some logic to programmatically add columns. So down here, it's adding columns to that grid, but that's unrelated to this. So this would work on any Excel spreadsheet. I didn't have a canned form that was mapped to those particular columns. So that's how we do the import example. Just want to take you over sort of an overview of what we saw, and then we'll take some questions. So for the basic import, we use the Excel export plugin. This ships with Servoy by default, so you don't have to do anything to set this up. You should find it in any project that you're using, and it's one line of code. It's called Excel export, and you give it your found set, and you give it an array of data providers that you want to export. You can optionally give it a template, and it'll fill an existing spreadsheet, with that's formatted the way you want it, with the data. The other example we saw was doing a more formatted export where we have control over the formatting. The example I showed you called this method create workbook from data set. So really we took a JS data set which had generated from the forms found set. And once we get that, we can just generate the workbook, and without doing anything else, you could just write it to a file. And we showed how we could download that. But the benefit of doing it this way is that you can get into some formatting. So one thing you could do is set the cell styles or the row styles or the header styles. Again, this is a pretty comprehensive API that covers the Excel spec. So I didn't want to show you everything. I just showed you how to change the background color and the font, but it would look something like this. And that comes with this Excel utils extension that you can get through the Web Package Manager. On the import side, it's the same extension, and all you have to do is get a workbook object for a file. So once I handle the file upload, then I'm able to just get a workbook and I can start reading through that. I can read down at the individual level, or I can do something quick and dirty like sheet.get sheet data returns a JS data set, and that's what we're able to generate a form to, a form that's bound to, etc. One thing that I would point out is the setup for the Excel utils. There is really good instructions here from my colleague Patrick on how to get the underlying library in, because right now the Web Package Manager doesn't import plugins, it just imports web components and modules. So you can import the module through the Web Package Manager, but you're going to need to add your dependency on Apache POI, which is the underlying library that does the Excel parsing. So there's really good instructions here on how to do that. The reason it's a little complicated is there's different versions of it, and there's also other extensions that use the same library. For example, the Servoy Jasper reports. So depending on your setup, you may take different steps, and that's why I recommend that you really go to the home page on the SVY Utils project page and sort of review these instructions to get set up. So I'll leave up this slide, which has the links on it, while I take some questions. Jan, do we have any? Hello, Jan, can you hear me?
Oh, it does help if I click unmute on my mic. I was already talking. You see, technical people and buttons is always a challenge. There was a question on the POI version, but I see a follow-up that it has been answered. And there's a question from Sander, which says, are XLSX files also supported? I guess he asked us before you pointed out that yes, they are supported.
Yeah, indeed.
So it looks like, so is the reason we are not shipping the most recent POI because it conflicts with Jasper reports, is that right? Because I don't understand that either.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not really just the most, it's not a matter of recent, there's sort of an extended version of it. Okay. And we do ship POI by default, which is what is used in the Excel port plugin, Excel export plugin. But yeah, we also ship it in the Jasper report, which has the extended support for XLSX files, for example. So to really get into it, that's the one you need. Basically, if you install the Jasper reports plugin, you get the libraries that you need but you also need to then remove a reference to the older the POI version that's in the default shipment. So maybe someday we should probably resolve this, in what's shipped. But it's one of those things where, well, which version do you want? Depends on what you're doing. But if you want to use the SVY utils Excel extension, then just follow the instructions there. You basically get the one that comes with the Jasper Reports plugin and make a few changes to your configuration, and you're set.
All right. Okay, there's the last question from Sander. Are the presentations used in the webinar also available for download, or is it just a video that you guys post?
Yeah, we generally post slides as well to the forum. There's a running forum thread for this topic. We love to hear feedback there. It's been kind of quiet, so I will post the slides for this and links to the recordings in the forum. So if you visit us there, please leave us some feedback and you can get the slides there as well.
Cool, and is this module going to be downloadable as well that you demoed us?
Yeah, we can make this downloadable and put it on demo.servoy.com as well.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, that's something we don't advertise very often, guys, but demo.servoy.com is a very handy reference place to go to and not only look at things in action, maybe you could bring it up, Sean, for a quick, so people can see what it is. So I love to go to demo.servoy.com if I need just to show something or see something in action. However, you can also download code right there. So if you're like, oh, I like this component or I like this chart, then there is a button right at the top that you can click on, and you can actually download a module or a sample piece of code and put it right in your own application. So the code is right there. So if you're lazy like me and you don't want to write all the code by yourself, then you just go there and copy paste it.